WikidataCon, and I'm super excited to have it this year as well. But we wanted to do something a bit different this year. We actually want participation. We were not able to, meet in person this year due to COVID, and actually in the past 2 years. So it looks like there is an actual need for us as a global community to kind of have a platform to discuss and talk about our challenges, about where we want to be. And so this panel is aiming to do just that. Our panelists, which we'll do around in a second, are here basically as anchors for the conversation, but really what we want is for people to unmute and just join the conversation. We will be using some guiding questions, but we are happy to facilitate as wide a discussion as possible. So without further ado, thank you to everyone joining us today. And let's do a quick round of introduction with the panelists that are here. We might have other people join us later on. So I'll start from the right. João, you first.
Sure, thanks, Shani. Hi, everyone. Good to have you all here. So this is João speaking from São Paulo, Brazil. I'm a professor in journalism in my city, São Paulo.
Houcemeddine.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Houcemeddine, Turkey. I'm actually a medical student and a research assistant at the University of Sfax, Tunisia. I am also a Wikimedian, and I hold the position of vice chair of Wikimedia Tunisia user group. Well, I have recently been elected as an AFCOM member, so that's all I think.
Thank you. And Andy?
Hello, everyone. I'm speaking to you from Birmingham, England. I'm a freelancer, but I've worked as a Wikimedian in residence with a number of institutions. I'm currently the pro bono Wikimedian in residence with ORCID, which I have been for some years. And most recently, I spent 2 years as Wikimedian in residence with Coventry University, also here in the English Midlands. And I've taught on university courses at a number of other places where I haven't necessarily been Wikimedian in residence. I've just been brought in for the course.
Andy, Mike.
Hi, I'm user Mike Peel. I'm talking from the Canary Islands, Tenerife, so off the coast of Africa, but formerly part of Spain. I'm a radio astronomer as my day job. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Instituto de Astrofísica de Canarias. But I also do a huge amount of stuff with Wikimedia in my other kind of hat. So I'm currently on one of the Wikimedia Foundation's grants committees. I was on the FTC. I was on the board of Wikimedia UK. I run PyBot and various other things around.
Thanks for joining, Mike. And Martin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Martin, a Wikipedian Wikidata trainer, formerly Wikimedian in residence at the University of Oxford. A long career involved in cataloguing and creating educational resources, and recently using Wikidata as a platform to teach people about databases.
Thanks, Mike. And LiAnna.
Hi, everyone. I am LiAnna Davis, and I am the Chief Programs Officer at Wiki Education. We are the nonprofit that runs the education program in the United States and Canada, and I am based in San Francisco, California, USA.
Thank you, LiAnna. And maybe in parenthesis, good to mention that a bit later on today, we're going to have another panel that is focused specifically on the work done in the US. But since this is a global panel, I did want someone from the US / Canada representing that work. So thanks for joining us as well. And my name is Shani Evenstein Sigalov. I am here in Israel. I work at Tel Aviv University, where I teach and also do research, and currently finishing my PhD on Wikidata. And I would say that the initial desire to do this panel comes from just what I said before. I think, you know, we are all usually really wrapped up in our own projects locally, you know, in our own contexts. But there comes a moment, especially when we have something like a global conference, for us to sit back, relax, and just think for a second about what we do together globally as a community, not only in our own specific projects and contexts, but what we can actually do together. And that ties actually to, I'm happy that João and LiAnna are here because they're also part of the Wikipedia and Education user group, which is trying to facilitate, right, work across the globe. So this perspective is important. And what our aim today is basically to kind of discuss together what more we can do, where, first of all, we want to go, and how we can get there together. So I'll start off with an easy breezy kind of question and just ask some panelists to share how they started and even persuaded their institutions to allow them to run these initiatives with Wikidata. And Martin, I want to start with you, just because.
That's a great reason. The way in for Wikidata in Oxford was that they wanted some way for students to, they wanted to connect the GLAM aspect of the institution, the museums and collections, with the students' learning. So they wanted the students to learn about, say, Song Dynasty China, but about objects and resources that were in Oxford. So this cuts across a bunch of different projects, different parts of the university, and different types of data. But saying, oh, this is actually quite easy. We can take the Song Dynasty, we can get like the most notable people associated with the Song Dynasty, we can get objects in Oxford that were made in the Song Dynasty and so on. And that's actually just a script. And then you can repeat that for all of Chinese history and Japanese history and Iranian history and so on. Yeah, the kind of immediacy and sustainability was such a big selling point, in that so many huge sums of money have been put in over the years by nationally and by universities into making teaching resources. But they're in Flash, or they're in how something is taught a particular year. That this would be, we can put time and effort into something which makes a resource which is sustainable and ongoing and will continue to grow in the future and is endlessly reusable and reusable in different languages. It's not going to be one thing on the server that expires or gets switched off eventually. I think those are great selling points, and I think the university sector I'm familiar with has learnt the lesson of investing lots of money into making the ideal, like the Flash resource or whatever, the self-contained thing that teaches this topic, that it's far better to have something open-ended that people draw different lessons from, and it's more diverse perspectives rather than there's one view on this topic being encapsulated in an educational resource. You make a web of different ideas that there are multiple pathways through, and different people can narrate their story of that topic.
Thanks, Martin. And I think, you know, we've also discussed, I mean, I've interviewed almost everyone here on the panel, either for my PhD or to participate in my course at Tel Aviv University. So I kind of had a chance to delve into the work many other people do around Wikidata. And one of the things that Martin really eloquently put is how universities are really complex entities because they have different roles. They do research, they need to attend to students, they also develop many things. And in a sense, one of the complexities, which we'll get to in a second, right? We do have a question about challenges, etc. But I think what comes out from what you're saying is how Wikidata is not just one thing. So one of the complexities is even explaining to people what it does, how they can, you know, when they hear that it exists, something called Wikidata exists, it's really complex to explain that it's not just one thing. It could be many things to many different people in different contexts. So I think your example, which is actually why I wanted you to start, so I did have my reasons, but thank you for sharing. And I want João to kind of across the world share how he got started as well.
Sure. So, well, I guess I go a while back. So it all started in 2014 when I did a Wikipedia project at the university. For the first time. At the time, I had to request official permission from the university dean. He said, okay, you can do that, but you also have to do all the other assignments that you are mandated to do. So my students have basically double burden. They had to do their actual full exams, and I actually had to do the whole grading for the exams, but also a Wikipedia assignment. And then at the same time, I launched this crazy idea. It was a call to duty at my research lab called Neuromat at the University of São Paulo, that Wikipedia, in general, Wikimedia project should be part of what we do in dissemination. And then from moving to Wikipedia, which was this crazy beginning, to Wikidata was actually simpler because then everyone was convinced. So my first Wikidata project was with my students in 2019. And then I was already incorporating into my seminar computational journalism. So the focus was on structured data. And to some extent, there was no better platform for engaging students than Wikidata.
Thanks, João. And I think, again, what comes out from these two very different examples is, or we're trying to maybe articulate, is that there is no one solution or one track to engage with Wikidata in the context of education or sciences or research. It really is, every single case is different. Every person that ends up engaging with Wikidata comes with a different set of objectives or needs. And it's really about finding those low-hanging fruits and starting where you can and just convincing your way around, just like we did with Wikipedia, I would say a decade and even longer ago. So thanks for sharing this. And I want to open the panel for another question that's going to guide us towards the more important stuff later on that I want to get to. And I'm wondering, you know, from your different experiences, what you've seen to work. Like, what are the things that you, engaging with students in different capacities and different ways and forms and shapes, what worked? What did you keep doing year after year after year? Most of you have been doing engagement for more than 1 year now. And so I'm just curious what worked. And I want to actually start with LiAnna on this one.
Thanks, Shani. So I think things that we've found that worked is putting together a very structured curriculum for people to follow. We have a series of training modules on introducing people to Wikidata and making sure that everyone is going through that same process of everyone comes in with, a different starting point. Some people have never even heard of open data before or structured data before. Some people have a sort of experience with it in the context of library science or some other platform that is comparable. But making sure that you kind of bring everyone up to speed at the same point that they are, and then move them through the really cool parts of Wikidata, get them in their editing, and then get them to querying so that they can learn how to use the information that's within Wikidata to be able to then see where there are back holes that they need to be helping to fill as well. I think has been one of the things that we've learned that has gone well.
Houcemeddine, what about you and your type of engagement?
Okay, I might surprise you, but it went simple to let people engage in Wikidata. It was more easier than Wikipedia. In fact, there are many hidden factors in contributing to Wikipedia. You have to be objective. You have to be fair. You have to have strong or robust language skills. You have to have broad knowledge about fields. So there are many things. But when working with Wikidata, you have the fact, and you only search for the fact and represent it in a structured way. So it had been very easy to engage people in that. As well, where we had computer science community here in Tunisia, and as you know, we are a low-resourced country. So there is a whole semantic web community here in Tunisia that we're seeking a knowledge graph to work with. In fact, we do not have resources to build one. So many people have been engaged with DPpedia when it appeared in, I think, between 2011, 2012. It was the trend here in Tunisia. But DPpedia has several flaws and it has several limitations. So when Wikidata has been created, we already thought that this can be a nice alternative to them, and that's why we kept waiting until 2015. And when the project grew, we know that all people here in Tunisia will be interested in learning it. So we just publicized that there is a knowledge graph that is built by Wikimedia Foundation. It is rich. It includes many fields, and we got people to know about it. We have done Sparkle tutorials. We have done tutorials about editing Wikidata. We have done tutorials about bots and gadgets. So and all went in a fluid way. We don't have any concerns, and even there are individuals from the university, seniors, that opened us, provided us materials to do that.
First of all, I see João is here, so he is welcome to join us here. He was invited, and he has been the Wikimedian in residence at the University of Edinburgh, which is in itself, I think, a position that we want to see more and more in more institutions, which is why I thought it would be good to have him here. So João, if you can just join us, wonderful, and say hello.
Hello.
And we're just sorry, you just came in, but I'm gonna just throw you into the waters, as they say, and hopefully you can say something about what has worked well at the University of Edinburgh in terms of engagement of students so far.
Well, we like to have like events. That was the first way in with Wikipedia and Wikidata, was that we wanted to hold events where staff and students could have an opportunity to explore, because the academic calendar is often very packed and they have assignments and all sorts of things going on. So we would do Halloween events where we would add witches to Wikidata, and have them at times during the week or in evenings when people could just come along, and then that would hopefully spark ideas, and they would see that it's something they could explore. And we would offer training courses as part of our digital skills program as well, where they could learn a bit more. And then, but also, hopefully by just getting academics in the room, it sparked ideas. And by attending conferences and platforms and forums where academics were already in the room anyway, we could just do little short presentations that would spark ideas, and then they would just leave our email address details and show a couple of Martin's visualizations that he'd done, and people would come back to us and sort of say, okay, could we collaborate on something? Could we do something in my autumn semester or in the summer semester? And we would develop a little sort of, short assignment, but mainly the thing that's worked is the design informatics course they just felt that teaching data science was something that needed practical real world data sets to work with. And that was something that they felt was lacking in their curriculum. And so they just offered this data fair project every October, where they offer the 45 master's students on the course the opportunity to work with a data set. And I was invited along with 15 other data holders, like the National Library of Scotland, like the Scottish Government, to pitch in 3 minutes a real world data set for the students to work with over a 5-6 week project, and see if they could do interesting things with that data set and visualize it in interesting ways, whether it's like 100 years of the Encyclopedia Britannica or the Edwin Morgan archive or peace treaties of international peace treaties data, and I just pitched the witchcraft data because that's something that sparks students' imagination, it's even sparked to students in Canadian universities as well. I've seen that a student has run with our database as well. They've not put it in Wikidata, sadly, which is a spur for me to do more work on it. But that's what's worked for us, is just getting into forums, holding events, sparking ideas, and just working with colleagues that have a little bit of a space in their academic calendar to do a little bit of work and experimentation, and then just making sure that students and staff have a good experience.
So if I'm trying to summarize everything that you're all saying, and which actually completely relates to my experience in Israel in general, is that have good resources. That's always a good thing. And thankfully, the community has worked long enough now so that there exists some type of resources out there, either in English that you might be able to translate to your local language or your local context, or you can actually talk to people to help you run something if you're just starting out. So having the right resources, having a really defined curriculum and stages of what you want to achieve is something LiAnna mentioned, and has always been my experience as well. Try not to be over ambitious, if you will, but having like really structured assignments for students. And something that comes up from both João and Ewan's experience is just work with the people you can, right? Work with the low-hanging fruits, collaborate with your local libraries in different institutions, or your local museum, and do a cross collaboration, because that might bring people in, and work with people who might naturally engage more with Wikidata, like digital humanities, like all these. There's an array of subjects that are more keen towards this type of work. For instance, I supported a professor at the Bar-Ilan University in Israel who's teaching a semantic web course. And she wanted her students to do like a practical project, and she wanted it to have actual real life impact. So, engaging with Wikidata was just perfect for it. So it's like finding these right places to start on, and just being really constructed in the way that we work. I will say, though, that to me, another thing was to understand that it's never going to be perfect at the beginning. Like, you have to try. This is like a new territory, and we're all experimenting differently in different modules and contexts, etc. So, and there is no one solution fits all. It's about trying to figure out what works to your context and your needs, and just creating that project and running with it, learning from it, iterating, changing it, and growing until you find something that is really strong. And with that, I actually want to move us to talk about the challenges, because there are so many of them. And I want Andy to start us with that, because Andy has been doing amazing work throughout the years in, working with so many institutions and universities and research and research organizations. But when it comes to Wikidata, it can be really tricky. It has been tricky for Israel, for Wikimedia Israel, for instance, to really be able to implement it more holistically, like we do for Wikipedia. It's tricky. It's not easy to explain, and it's not easy to find the right people to collaborate with. So I want us to discuss challenges a bit. And Andy, I know you had a few, so why don't you share some with us?
Thank you. Yes, I think it's perhaps slightly over-egging it to say that the problem is just with Wikidata. I think there are two layers to it. So it can be harder to sell Wikidata to academics or to students because they don't know anything about it, and they do know what Wikipedia is. And obviously you can show somebody Wikipedia and explain it in 2 minutes. It might take them a bit longer to learn to use it as an editor, but you can show them this is an encyclopedia, and here you can read about the history of your home city very quickly on Wikipedia. It will take you longer to explain the basics of Wikidata. So that's the first hurdle, is just familiarity. But the other issues that I had in my most recent residency applied to both Wikidata and Wikipedia, and indeed to other sister projects, which there was just it was difficult to get uptake. I did some teaching with Wikidata that went reasonably well, but across the board, getting students and academics interested in using Wikimedia projects at all in teaching or for assignments or as a leisure activity was very difficult. And I think it was a combination of factors. I mean, I had a 2-year part-time residency, and almost halfway, but not quite halfway through it, the pandemic started. And obviously that changed a lot of things. But even in the sort of 10 months before that, we'd had very low uptake at Coventry University. And some of the reasons for that were political with a small p. There had been changes to the way the university was teaching. They were using new software, which all the lecturers were having to get to grips with, and they were having to migrate their course modules from the old software to the new software. And as it was explained to me, migrating something and keeping it the same was difficult enough, that migrating it and then trying to include something new in it at the same time is going to be too onerous. And I think there was also some difficulty for some people in just seeing how we could make it relevant for them. I was confident that we could, but it was an uphill struggle sometimes to even find the right people to talk to. I would be passed from one person to another. And I don't know whether that was a symptom of British higher education at that time, or whether it was a more local symptom at the university group where I was located. I'm not sufficiently familiar with the sector to be able to say for sure which one of those it was. What did work was where we could do something small and discreet. So suggesting somebody that they did something that lasted over several weeks as part of something else was more difficult. But saying to somebody, I can do an hour-long session, or I can do an afternoon-long session for your students, and I will fill that time for you, what was appealing to them. And I got a couple of uptakes for that. So it's interesting to see that we have a lecturer in journalism here, because one of the things I did was to teach data journalism students who are doing a module in data journalism as part of their journalism course, all about Wikidata. And some of them took to that like a duck to water. They were very interested in it, and they could see how Wikidata could be used to source stories. So I used the example of a collaboration that somebody did between Wikidata and OpenStreetMap, where they created Wikidata items for everybody in the city of Brussels in Belgium who had a street named after them. And they added to the Wikidata items the gender of the person. And then they tagged every street in Brussels with the Wikidata ID of the person it was named after. And then they produced a color-coded map. I'm glad to say they didn't use red and blue, or pink and blue, but they did a color-coded map to show what proportion of the streets in the city of Brussels were named after women. And as you probably guess, it was a very small percentage. And as I understand it, as a result of that work, the city authorities in Brussels have agreed to name more streets after women. Now, I didn't do that work. I wish I could say that I did, but I used that as a teaching example, and that obviously engaged the students. You could see lights going on and eyes widening when you talked about that, and they then started to look for where they could find similar stories. So we looked at public artwork in Coventry and the gender of the subjects of the statues or the people who created the work, and so on. So that was successful, but that was because it was done in a fairly small amount of time and it was fairly discreet. Where I tried to interest people in a 10-week program where I would go in once an hour for 10 weeks, we had less interest.
Thanks, Andy. And what you're saying actually ties completely to something João has been saying for a long time. In the last time that he presented to my students, I remember that he said, you know, if Wikidata is the solution, what is the actual question, or what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and kind of trying to do projects around specific things that need to be solved has been really successful to him in his context, and has actually allowed him to do quite a lot of work that had actual impact on his, you know, society, on his in his language, etc., etc. And maybe he can share a bit more about that later on. But I'm sorry, I want to jump because I see in the room that also here is Daniel Mitchum. Daniel, can you speak? Are you able to join us? Or Daniel is not here already? Is he? I'm not sure. Well, if Daniel is here, it would be interesting to hear, because Daniel has been working at the University of Virginia in a data science center that he kind of was able to open there, and had quite many opportunities there. So I think that's another interesting perspective to hear. And I read in the chat that Stacy had some interactions with her students. And Stacy, I'm wondering if you are willing to talk about some of the challenges that you've had.
Sure. So, hi, everybody. Yeah, and I just want to thank all the panelists so far for this discussion. It's really great to have this space. And, you know, I think the challenge for me, so for those who may know me but may not know that I transitioned to a full-time professorship about a year ago in the Faculty of Information at the University of Toronto. So now I get my own courses to do things in. And so my challenge was, you know, I've done a lot of events or campaigns or different kinds of outreach activities through the library, or working with different faculty members, but then that transition to creating full, like 12-week long projects or courses. So that has been interesting and exciting because of all of the kind of space. But the challenges for me were doing things in a 100% online environment because of COVID restrictions that we had over there. Well, we're still in here in Canada. So not being able to be in the room with students, I think was, you know, a different approach, and really thinking about how to bring everybody along in a fairly large class in a way that enabled them to feel comfortable and successful in their work. So that for me took some thinking. And that was, for me, starting to hold sort of smaller tutorials for students and giving them the chance to talk through their issues became a really important part of supporting their work.
Thanks for sharing that. I share, you know, having an academic course that is focused on that, I know exactly what you're talking about. And finding like the right balance, especially when we've just moved to fully online, of how do we engage people? How do we keep track of what they're doing and make sure that they actually get to work collaboratively, which is not as easy as it may sound. To me, the solution were, besides what we've already mentioning, like really structuring it, really having clear assignments and clear, you know, guidelines to what we want them to do. It was about letting them work in small groups, which I used to hate that, really. I was a fan of people working individually and just, doing the work, and courses had more impact like that because, just the numbers shrink 2 times, 3 times if you let them do the same assignment in a group. So you have less impact, which is something to consider. Thankfully, I was in a place where I already showed impact in other courses, so I kind of didn't have to show for it. So I was able to just do it and let them work in small groups, and just to accept that we'll have less outcomes of the course, but also let them do peer review of each other, just which is, again, more tricky to do, I think, if it's just an alternative assessment rather than a full course, or full training like Stacy and I are doing, or João is doing. And so it really depends on the context. It's not always possible because it will require more time. So these are just more challenges to consider. I'm wondering if anyone else want to share some challenges before we move on to the next question of starting to imagine what we can do together as a global movement. So, Mike, go ahead.
So I come from this with a different perspective, I guess, because I'm on the research side. So officially, I don't get to do any teaching or anything to do with Wikimedia at all. So everything I do is basically in my evenings or weekends. But in general, when talking to researchers about Wikidata and Wikimedia, they just have no time. It's really the problem. So just trying to get them to put aside a bit of time to do something which isn't necessarily their core activity is really difficult. But also just generally getting the opportunities to have students or be able to engage. So I'm attached to the University of La Laguna, but I don't actually do anything there, so I don't get to meet the students. So I basically just grab students whenever I can through things like Outreachy and just cope with that, basically. But it would be really nice if there was more avenues for research scientists to get more involved with the education side as well.
Yeah, I think what you're saying completely goes back to, necessity is the mother of all inventions. And it's like we're figuring out how to do it just with the resources we each have in our context. And I think that's amazing. I mean, the idea of collaborating with GLAMs, with Outreachy, with like separate organizations that have a specific agenda to achieve something related to research science or, academic work or education. It could be K-12 as well. It doesn't have to be just higher education. And I want to acknowledge that as well, because we actually had in Israel some good experiences with high school students learning and engaging with Wikidata. So it's about finding those right opportunities and just experimenting and not being afraid to kind of spread far and, plant those seeds as you do in outreach. And that actually brings me to another question I wanted to offer for the panel, because what all of us have been talking about so far is kind of grassroots efforts. In a sense, it's a bottom-up approach. And when we are trying to change the world, as we do on Wikimedia projects, we sometimes need to think about the other direction, which is top-down approach, or talking to policymakers and people who are in positions to make decisions and then disseminate them more widely. And so I wanted us to pause, or like to take a few minutes to think collaboratively. And that's not only for panelists, it's for everyone in the room, to basically think, what do we need actually as a community? What do we need as individuals and as a community to kind of scale what we do? What are we missing? What needs to happen for this work, which all of us agree is important, it has impact, there are different reasons to why to do it, all good reasons. And still, it's very difficult. It's not happening everywhere. And we are just not progressing maybe as fast as we might want globally. So this is an open question. Just unmute and talk about your impressions on what needs to be done.
Okay, so I can start. I had my hand raised. I would like to also address something that Stacy brought up, which is the context of the pandemic. I think changed a lot the way that we think about the role of technologies like Wikidata and others into the academic environment. And a new challenge that also connects to what you were saying, Shani, is about not only now looking at what we do as peer reviewing, but also peer bonding, which is a way to connect students that basically had never met. So it was an experience of not meeting students and students not meeting each other for 2 years, basically in Brazil. So I haven't gone to the university back in 2 years now. And one experiment that I did this year was to basically have the students go to their window and take a picture of what they saw, and we had a direction, so they needed to take 2 pictures, one of what they saw, one of someone who was doing food delivery during the pandemic, and have this project then try to create a common meaning for them. And it wasn't Wikidata, but I think it's the same spirit. We use structured data on commons to express collectively a sense of community. And I think this opens a new direction on the way that you can think of this project, not only as connecting the classroom to a broader community, but also creating mechanisms for good communications among students. And I think this relates to what you're saying, Shani, about I think what we need is a better understanding of how Wikimedia projects, Wikidata, and others are actually part of the education process more broadly, which is basically we need more resources, we need more research, and we need to really understand our Wikimedia projects as an open education resource that needs to be considered. And there is a lot of advocacy to be done here.
Thanks, João.
I wanted to talk about narrative, if I...
Please.
Yeah, I think the movement could do a much better job of telling a story which involves a wider audience. So from psychology, you know that narratives are much more compelling in shaping people's behaviors than facts and figures. And then you look at screenwriting theory. What is a narrative? Well, there's some kind of relatable protagonist, and they're trying to do something which is good, but they face opposition, they face barriers of some kind. Maybe there's antagonists. And we've got that ideally. So the protagonist is us, like the us, the most inclusive possible us. It could be you, the reader. We're trying to do something good for research and education and culture. We face barriers. I'm not saying that publishers or museums or whatever are the enemy, but we have working practices and licensing and so on that are kind of obstacles so there are little obstacles on the way to towards our greater goal, and there are small victories along that greater goal. So it's a really compelling narrative. And in the case of Wikidata, once you understand what a knowledge graph is, you realize there's kind of the good, free, non-invasive knowledge graph, massive multi-purpose database. At the same time, there's the Facebook Meta massive knowledge graph, quite invasive about the details of private individuals, and there's surveillance capitalism. And there's kind of a race on like which of those technologies becomes the central one that everyone depends on. Is it all going to be things that are owned by big corporations for their purposes, or is it going to be what's owned by all of us for a collective purpose? So I think that the publicity and the way Wikimedia generally communicates to the world what it is could foreground Wikidata and what we're doing with Wikidata as a good, that we're on the side of the public. The public, the ordinary person, wherever they are in the world, should be on our side and consider helping us because we're doing something difficult but good.
Thanks, Martin. And I think you've certainly been one of the advocates globally for, the telling a story with data kind of approach, which is a must in my perspective. And I think, people doing work in the US as well, like Andrew Lee, who've been telling stories with, materials from Andrew and Richard, of course, doing work with the Met's Museum collection and telling those stories and, just showcasing what it is that we can do with Wikidata have been really crucial. And that ties to what I think Ewan said before in the chat of really just documenting the vast range of different types of applications and collaborations that we are able to run through and with Wikidata. And we don't have that just yet, right? We are lacking apropos what we need and what we need to improve on. I would say that is definitely one of the things. I mean, again, I feel really privileged because I got to interview through my PhD, 60 people doing work in depth. And I've seen 121 people answering my questionnaires about their work with Wikidata. So I know more than others, but it can't just be in my head, right? It needs to be collected and shared with the academic realm in a better way. And I think one of the things we've started to do, but are still not doing well enough and could improve on, is really strengthening our connection with adjacent fields. And in adjacent, I mean the OER community, which we are in a sense part of, but partly also not part of, just because for some weird reason, Wikipedia and Wikidata or Wikimedia projects work, despite the fact that we're the biggest OER that exist worldwide. We are not considered like the typical type of OER work. So just advocating in these communities, being in every single, important conference about OERs and just telling the stories time and time and time again until people get it. And doing this type of advocacy. LiAnna, I see your hand. You want to share more?
Yeah, I think tying in what João and Martin and you have just said here, Shani, and as well as something Andy mentioned earlier, I think part of the challenge is, many of us started with Wikipedia in education, right? And we didn't have to have the kind of what is Wikipedia or why is this important or why do people use it? And this because people were just using Wikipedia every day. And people are actually using Wikidata every day too, right? It's what, is helping populate the knowledge panel on Google. It's what is answering if they're asking Siri a question or one of their other devices a question. It's what's helping feed into those answers. And I think the more we can do as a community to showcase how Wikidata is actually being used and is influencing their everyday lives, that helps on a number of fronts, right? It helps on funders who are interested in funding Wikidata work. It helps on, deans or other higher ups at institutions to support Wikidata projects. It helps working with GLAM institutions or others to get collections data into Wikidata, kind of any of the external stakeholders that help bring our projects and our programs to life. They need to understand the power and why this is so important. And so making sure that we do a better job as a community of speaking out about why Wikidata is critical, I think is the kind of unifying theme for me, that we all understand why Wikidata is so cool and so important, but how can we make the world at large know Wikidata and know that they're actually using Wikidata on a daily basis?
Yeah, I'll completely agree. And I'll add, it's not just the policymakers and the OER community or the digital humanities community or the research community, right, that uses Wikidata quite a lot, or it could be useful to what they do already. It's about also being part of discussions happening in the UN and at UNESCO in terms of global education and, we're just not in the room in that sense. And I think we can get better at that. But Houcemeddine, you wanted to share your screen. Did you get rights to do that?
Not yet.
Not yet.
But I can talk about what I wanted to share. Okay. So what I think is that when dealing with the students in general, is that we do not want to let Wikidata as an assignment to the student, as a part of a project, of a final project, etc. I have the right now. I will share my. So as an almost failed medical student here in Tunisia, what I find out is that people, when learning and preparing for exams, they tend to highlight the keywords in the textbooks. They answer the question from previous exams, and so on. So there are these two things that I think they are universal. All people from all over the world do that. But what if Wikidata can help people do that? What if Wikidata can help students highlight the main keyword in their textbook, in their lecture notes, like that? What if it can take extract an excerpt from the textbook that answers a given question, a past question, instead of searching the whole textbook for that? So by that, I think that people can feel Wikidata, feel it useful. They will not just contribute to Wikidata because it is an assignment. They feel that it can be useful, it can change their own life. So what we have done with the collaboration of the TIB Open Science team in Germany, so we have developed this code, which is simple. It just extracts the statements about a given topic, and we just use the label and the aliases to highlight the text. So as you see here, for COVID-19, you have, for example, the symptoms in a given color, the techniques that are used for screening in a color, etc. And by that, they can learn. They can find that this is an important question. It is highlighted too much. So these are the symptoms. And we find out that there are probably some kind of symptoms that were missed in Wikidata. So the student will highlight that information. He will take it back to Wikidata and write it. And by that, we can ensure the completeness of Wikidata while learning, while doing their traditional stuff as a student. Concerning the question answering thing, there are some feature-based measures for semantic similarity measures, and these feature-based measures for sentence semantic similarity can be used for question answering. They are based on taxonomies, but can be used when having Wikidata as a reference, the instance of the subclass of taxonomy. And by that, we can have kind of common question. We can get them answered using Wikidata. So these are the two examples I wanted to share here. I think this is the kind of thing that we have to do here.
So you were talking about continuing to invest in tools, and I believe, as machine learning and, NLP progresses, our work will evolve as well. But it looks like, being cognizant of time and the fact that we have 5 minutes to wrap, I wanted to be just a bit tiny practical, if I can, and kind of ask everyone in the room, what can we try to imagine where we want to be in 1 year, in 3 years, in 5 years, in a decade? What can we do practically now as a global community to get there sooner, rather than rather than later. To me, documentation is one thing, and continuing the outreach and the, the grassroots efforts, of course, all of that is right. It needs to continue to grow as it does. But we need to document what else, what can we do together globally to make sure we are advocating for better dissemination of Wikidata. That's an open question to anyone in the room. Please unmute and just speak up.
I'll say I have high hopes for the movement strategy process and the theme of decentralization and thematic hubs emerging. I could see some kind of Wikidata hub or Wikidata outreach, Wikidata and education kind of hub emerging from the movement strategy process as a centralized way across multiple countries and workspaces to be able to advocate for the things that we've talked about here that we need to make Wikidata and education even better.
Absolutely, that could be a way forward. Any other ideas that we can implement in the coming years?
I have one that you might class as a pink pony idea, in that it's quite ambitious. But what I really want is for wider society to be talking about Wikidata more. I mean, Wikipedia is 20 years old now. There are mainstream podcasts about it. There are magazine articles and book articles in, the Guardian and the New York Post and the Washington Times, and the same all around the world. Most people know what Wikipedia is, even if they don't understand what goes on in the mechanics of it. And that's not true for Wikidata. And I think we need more general awareness in society about Wikidata's existence and its purpose, even if people don't know how to edit it or how to query it. That will help to start the conversations. And in terms of our own responses and responsibility in that area, I think we need to talk about Wikidata every time we talk about Wikipedia. So if I'm invited to give a talk to a university about Wikipedia, then I will still talk about Wikidata, even if it's not mentioned in the invitation. If I'm invited to do a press or a radio interview about Wikipedia, I will mention Wikidata and get it onto the table as part of that. And hopefully they'll use what I say about it in whatever they publish. And I think we all as Wikimedians need to do that. And we need to be talking to our friends in the media, to the journalists that we know, to our journalism students, and saying, you need to be telling people that this is a thing. And it's a thing that has a bearing on their lives, because as others have pointed out, it's what powers Siri and Alexa and all the others. It's what powers Google search results and others. And so we all need to make sure it's being talked about. And once people are informed about it, then they're able to become curious about it. Whereas if you simply put up a poster saying, come and learn about Wikidata, you might as well put up something in Chinese. It doesn't mean anything to people. So that's my pink pony. It's greater societal awareness.
Thanks, Andy. And with 1 minute to go, I just want to, obviously this conversation has not ended. We're just starting to, scratch the surface, as they say. And I feel at least that this discussion needs to continue. I'm hoping that the Wikipedia and education user group, which is not just about Wikipedia and not just about just education, can help facilitate the rest of this discussion. And in the meantime, please use the Etherpad to share your thoughts so we can take that later on and try to actually practically do something, like propose a grant for more documentations, etc., and continuing to doing outreach and continuing to help each other throughout our local efforts. And with that in mind, I just want to thank everyone for joining today. It's been really interesting to follow your work, and always gets inspired by hearing you all. So thanks for joining us, people in the audience as well, and people at home listening later on. Please participate in the Etherpad and have a great rest of the WikidataCon. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.